Hi everyone, this week we are beginning the final unit of chemistry, unit 3, and it's called Chemistry and Society. So I'm just going to run through the topics in this unit quickly to give you an idea of where we're at. We've got 5 topics in this unit: metals, plastics, fertilisers, nuclear chemistry and chemical analysis. Normally we would start with metals, but metals has quite a bit of practical that I would ideally like to do, and I'm hoping to get you back in class before we start, or at least for a little bit of the metals topic. So we're not going to be starting with metals, we're going to be starting this unit with plastics. Plastics is a really quick little topic, so is fertilisers, and if I'm honest, so is nuclear. So we're going to try and get through these topics really nice and quickly, just covering all the kind of basic information. Chemical analysis is actually something that we've been doing throughout the course, so we're not going to really spend any specific time on that. We've already done quite a bit of this. You'll see titration, making a salt, precipitation, all in the acids and bases topic, collecting a gas we covered during reaction rates. This week, as well as plastics though, I'm going to set you to watch 5 minutes worth of YouTube videos just to remind you about flame tests and gas tests, which you will have seen at various points in your time in chemistry and in science in general. Okay, so let's get started on plastics, which is our topic for this week. So I've got some starter questions here. First of all, thinking back to Unit 2, I'd like you to give the definition of an unsaturated compound, and question 2, what type of reaction can unsaturated hydrocarbons undergo which saturated hydrocarbons cannot? So if you want to, pause the video now and try and come up with an answer to these questions. Okay. Here are the answers then. So an unsaturated compound contains at least one carbon-to-carbon double bond, or you could also abbreviate that as and just write the structure contains C double bond C. Now, when we did some past papers, a few of you were explaining it as in unsaturated means that something can be added to it, and that is right, but if you're asked for the definition in an exam, you need to talk about having carbon-carbon double bonds. You need to mention carbon-carbon as well. If you just said double bond, that won't get you the marks. You have to say at least one carbon-carbon double bond. Okay, and then I've kind of mentioned this, the type of reaction unsaturated hydrocarbons can undergo is addition reactions, and the bromine water test is an example of this type of reaction, so we can use an addition reaction to tell whether a hydrocarbon is saturated or unsaturated. Okay, so we're going to get started on plastics. I've done a similar thing to what I did with the previous notes, and I've got some slides where you've got to write down the information, but I've also, in this topic in particular, I've got quite a lot of background information that you don't need to write down. We'll try and run through it quite quickly, but I think it's important to give the topic some context. Okay, so learning intentions, like I say, it's quite a quick wee topic. Hopefully this will be quite nice and simple. I'll give you a moment to read through those if you would like. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a little general introduction. You will all be pretty aware of the many varied uses of plastics. I really want to use this slide to just encourage you to think about, as well as kind of short-term uses of plastics, what long-term uses can you think of as well? Because I've got some examples of single use on this slide. Okay, so long term, we've obviously got lots of different kind of building materials, also in medicine, things like some medical implants, medical devices contain plastics, and pipes. There's all sorts of really key things for our infrastructure and for our way of life now that are made of plastics. So we do tend to think of plastics as something that are kind of throwaway, single use, something that's very bad and should be banned, and absolutely the kind of plastics on the left hand side of this image I think are unnecessary, and we really need to work towards phasing them out. But I think we do need to acknowledge that there are some really important uses of plastic that allow us to do things these days that in a much safer and more hygienic and a generally better way than we've been able to do in the past, particularly in medicine, but also in construction and a range of other things. So plastics can be bad, but they are also quite important. So plastics, like I mentioned, are extremely useful and allow us to do a lot of things which are quite helpful for particularly for manufacturers of different products, such as food. Actually, the food industry is another one where plastics do potentially have a role in things like preservation. So Plastics allow us to do all these things because they have some amazing properties which are not necessarily common to a lot of other materials, or certainly not all materials have all of these properties. So you can see some examples. If you think about a shampoo bottle, it's flexible, it's watertight, it's shatterproof, it's light, easily moulded, durable, and there's loads of reasons why that's beneficial, and why that makes it plastic an ideal material for this application. So if you want to think about those, you can for a little minute. Pause the video. But I'll just fill in this table here. So all sorts of reasons why plastics are an ideal material for things like a shampoo bottle, but also a huge variety of other applications. Okay, so this is a little bit of technical knowledge about plastics, which is mandatory at National 4. It's not mandatory at National 5, so I'm not making you write this down, but it is quite good background knowledge. So there are two different groups of plastics, thermosoftening plastics, or they can also just be called thermoplastics, and these ones can be reshaped. They soften or melt when heated, and then you can reshape them. So they often come as granules. You might have heard of nurdles, like little bits of plastic that often wash up on the beach, and they're the kind of raw material that then get poured into moulds to make all sorts of different products. So those are thermoplastics, or thermosoftening plastics. And then you've also got thermosetting ones, which do not soften on heating, and they can't be reshaped. So they're harder to recycle. So these are things like you might use for plug sockets, pot handles, kettles, that type of thing. So things you don't want to melt when heated. One way to remember it is to think of thermosetting as in set, it's set in shape, but you don't need to spend time memorising these at National 5. So I would expect a lot of you to be pretty aware of the problems associated with plastic, particularly in the issue that most plastics are non-biodegradable. There's been a lot in the news recently, started kind of with the Blue Planet series. The issue of ocean plastics was really brought to everybody's attention these days, and I think we're all now quite aware of the major problem that pollution due to plastic waste is causing, both on land and in the waterways, rivers and oceans. So littering obviously contributes a large part to that problem, and also just poor disposal routes as well. So a lot of ocean plastic comes from some certain countries that have poor disposal routes, but also actually you should be aware that some plastic waste, there's an issue with plastic waste being exported from countries like the UK to other countries which perhaps don't manage it as well. So that's a major problem. And the other problem associated with plastic waste is something called microplastics. So the fact that plastics are non-biodegradable means they don't break down into sort of their individual atoms and molecules to be reused in the same way as plant material can break down. They just break into smaller and smaller pieces, and that leads to these things called microplastics. We don't really know at the moment what the health impact of microplastics is, so this is quite a kind of important area of scientific research at the moment. Something you may not have been aware of is that plastics also produce toxic gases when they're burned, so this creates a big problem if you are burning plastics to try and dispose of them. They can produce carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide and hydrogen chloride, which effectively is just a gas that will react with any water in your body and turn into hydrochloric acid straight away. So really nasty stuff, so it's really important that you never burn plastics in the home. Okay, so we're moving on now to the first bit of what I would describe as mandatory knowledge, something you need to know for National 5 Chemistry. We're going to look at making plastics, so you need to write down the information on this slide in your notes to help you remember it. So something, again, I hope you might have been aware of, but crude oil is the main raw material used to make plastics, and also synthetic fibres like polyester, which are used in clothing. So as well as being harmful in terms of causing pollution, plastics are also made from a non-renewable resource, which is another big problem that we're trying to address in chemistry at the moment. So plastics are examples of materials called polymers, and polymers are long chain molecules formed by joining together a large number of small molecules called monomers. So you can see the picture on the right hand side. So mono means one, and a monomer is a single molecule. The mer part means part, so monomer is like one part. And then if we join together lots of monomers, we get lots of parts. So poly means many, so a polymer just means many parts, and it's a long chain of individual little links called monomers, and we'll look in more detail at the type of monomer that we can use in a wee minute. So make sure you pause the video and write this down if you haven't done so already. Okay, so we're gonna look at the mechanism for how we make the chains to make a certain type of polymer in a wee bit. But first we're just going to look at the names of plastics. This should be nice and easy. So the name of a polymer is based on the name of the monomer used. You just add poly on the front. It's as easy as that. So if we're using, the first example is if we're using the monomer ethene, the name of the polymer would be polyethene, just sticking poly on the front. We can also put brackets around the name of the monomer, so you might see that coming up in papers as well. So make sure, I'd like you to copy down this table and complete it, so make sure you pause the video now and have a go at that, just so you get the hang of naming polymers. Okay, so here are the answers to that table there. Okay, so I said we were going to look at the mechanism, how these monomers actually link up to form chains. There are two different mechanisms for this. We can have addition polymerization, and there's also something called condensation polymerization. Condensation polymerization used to be a National 5, but it's been removed, so we're just going to be looking at addition polymerization. And addition polymerization involves unsaturated monomers, so this is why I gave you that starter question at the beginning. So in addition polymerization, unsaturated monomers with a carbon-carbon double bond link together. What happens is each carbon-carbon double bond breaks, and that leaves the carbon atoms free to link up with another molecule. So you can see in this image, you've got 3 ethene molecules. The double bond in all of those breaks, and that gives each carbon a free bond to then link up with a neighbouring molecule to form a long chain. Now, generally we only ever draw maybe 3 monomers linking up, but most polymers are made of a few hundred or many thousands of monomer units in a chain, but we only ever draw a small part of the monomer chain. What we're going to look at in the rest of this lesson is how we can draw the polymer chain for different monomers, and also how we can work backwards from a polymer to figure out what the structure of the monomer would have been. So this, again, you don't have to write this down, but this is another way of thinking about it, which I quite like. So imagine you've got lots of little groups of mice holding hands, Mickey Mouse pairs, and when the double bond breaks, it's a bit like them breaking one of their hands, and that then allows them to join on to the next group of mice to create a long chain. I might try and show you this with mods in the next part of the video. So like I said, when you're given a monomer structure, you should be able to draw the polymer structure formed and draw something called the repeating unit. So all of this information on this slide, this is what we're going to look through in the next part of the video. I'm going to go over some examples of how to draw polymers from the monomers, draw the repeating unit, and if we're given a polymer, draw the monomer and the repeating unit, and vice versa. For our first example, we're going to look at the polymerization of the monomer chloroethene. So here's the monomer chloroethene, and we can see it's got 2 carbons, which is why it's called ethene, but it also has a chlorine atom instead of a hydrogen atom, so it's chloroethene. This is what it looks like in the mod here. So first thing we're going to do is write the name of the polymer formed from this monomer. I hope you can do that, so pause the video now and give it a go. Okay, nice and easy. We just stick poly on the front, so we're just going to call this polychloroethene. Okay, now you might have noticed when you looked at the table of naming polymers that some of these names are familiar, particularly polyethene. Sometimes we do abbreviate them a little bit, so polyethene is just the chemical name for polythene. So polythene bags, etc., they're all made of polyethene. Polyvinyl chloride, you might not have heard of that one, but you probably have heard of PVC, which again is another abbreviation. So these polymer names are actually probably quite familiar. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to draw the structure of part of a polymer chain with 3 monomers linked together for chloroethene. So I thought I would just show you that with the mods. So we've got our 3 monomers here, and all that's going to happen is the double bonds are going to break, and the monomers are going to link up. Oh, that one's broken already. Now, technically speaking, we could link them up in different ways. We could link them up head to tail, or we could connect this one up to here, which would mean the chlorines were facing each other. But for simplicity, we're just going to connect them up so that the chlorine atoms are always facing away from the other chlorine atom in the neighbouring molecule. I hope that makes sense. So we're just going to connect these up. And again, I could connect it up so that the chlorine atoms were head to head, were together, but just to keep things simple, I'm going to connect it up the other way. Oops. Okay, so there is our polymer chain. Now it looks a bit messy, and when we draw these, we draw them try and draw them a little bit neater. We're not going to draw it exactly how it looks on here. Something to say about this is that this is one of the few cases in chemistry where we would leave what I would call a free bond. So when we draw a part of a polymer chain, we're going to leave a free bond at each end because we don't have anything connected, because we're imagining, like I mentioned before, that this chain is not made of just 3 units, but it's made of maybe hundreds or thousands. So we're just going to draw a small part. So to draw this, it's easiest always to have your monomer in this H shape when you start off, and each monomer has 2 carbons. And we're going to link 3 monomers together. So I would start off by drawing 6 carbons in a chain, and I'm remembering I'm going to have these free bonds at either end, and then I'm just going to add on the substituents. So thinking about each pair of carbons being from one monomer. So I'm just going to add on what I would call these groups, I would call the substituents of the monomer. And actually, I think I did mine when I made the model. I did end up actually, if you see, I did end up with 2 chlorine atoms beside each other. But for simplicity's sake, we will imagine that we don't have that, and we'll imagine that we always just add on that each monomer lines up in perfect order, so that we always have the polymer just with the exact same structure. Just imagining I've picked this diagram up and just put it here, here, and here. So technically it would be possible for me to draw another chlorine here, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to draw it as it's written here, and it just keeps it simpler. Okay, so that is my polymer chain. And then the next thing I have to do is draw the repeating unit of this polymer. So the repeating unit is basically just as it sounds. It's the part of the structure that repeats itself. So you're going to look and you're just going to think, well, we've got carbon with 2 hydrogens, we've got a carbon with a hydrogen and a chlorine, so this doesn't repeat itself here. But then we've got another section where we've got a carbon with 2 hydrogens and a carbon with a hydrogen and a chlorine. So this section here is the same as this section here. And if we look at the next bit, this section here again is the same. So don't necessarily do this on your one, but if you were in an exam, you could do this. You could just draw a dotted line and just think, yep, I could pick this up and put it on top of this, and then on top of this, and it would all be exactly the same. So this must be the repeating unit, and it will pretty much always contain 2 carbons. So that'll be that part of the chain. Not always, I wouldn't always go on that. I would just go on literally whether you think you can imagine picking this up and putting it on and putting it on, and that being the unit that repeats itself. So when we draw the repeating unit, it's pretty much almost exactly the same as drawing the monomer, except that this time, so actually if we're given the monomer, that's the easiest way to do it, is that we just, the repeating unit is just going to be exactly the same as the monomer. The only difference is that we don't have the double bond in the repeating unit. So the repeating unit is part of the polymer chain. So instead of the double bond in the middle, we show the 2, what I would call free bonds on either side, because we're imagining that that is then connected up to a bigger part of the chain. Okay, and then finally, just a wee recap, what is the name given to the process by which chloroethene, made a wee mistake there, forms a polymer? Have a think about that. Okay, and that is just what we've looked at just there. is we've just looked at addition polymerization. Something to be aware of is that for addition polymerization to take place, the monomer must be unsaturated. So that doesn't really relate to this question, but this is just a point to remember. So this is the second example. We're going to look at how we draw the polymer formed from propene monomers. So this would be called polypropene. And we're going to show three monomers linked again. So first thing to do is to think about what the monomer would look like. Prop, what does that tell us? Hopefully you're thinking 3 carbons, so prop means 3 carbons, and it's propene, so there is 1 carbon-to-carbon double bond, and then we have as many hydrogens as we need to make each carbon have 4 bonds. So I'm drawing this out like this first of all, but I don't want to have it drawn like this for drawing my polymer. What I want to have is I want to have it drawn in like the H shape that I mentioned in the previous example. So I'm going to draw my monomer in the H shape over here, and then I'm going to draw my polymer all linked together. So to draw it in the H shape, we're imagining we're going to draw these hydrogens straight up and down. The double bond is always the bar of the H. So if you think about an H, when you're drawing on polymer, you always want that to be the double bond of the monomer. Okay, and then I'm going to imagine picking up this carbon this group here and just twisting it round to be below this hydrogen. So here we go. So I'm making the double bond the kind of bar of the H, and I've got my 2 hydrogens on the right hand side here. I've got a hydrogen up here, and then I'm going to abbreviate this to make it easier, and I'm going to call that CH3. Okay, so now that I've got my H shape, it's really nice and easy to show 3 monomers linking together, because I just have to draw 6 carbons in a chain, and then draw, remember these are again what I would call substituents around the double bond. So to draw my 3 lots of this linked together, I'm just going to have 6 carbons in a chain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to have my free bonds at either end. And then I'm just going to add in my substituents. So on the left hand carbon, I've got a hydrogen and a CH3. And then on the right hand carbon, I've just got 2 hydrogens. And again, we could technically have it flipped over in the next one, but we're just going to draw it exactly as it is here. So we're just going to pick that up and draw it again. One thing to be careful of when you're doing this is to make sure that if you're drawing a bond between a carbon and a CH3 group, that it goes to the carbon and not to the hydrogen. Okay, so if I drew that, that would be wrong. Okay, so this bond should go to the carbon. Okay, lovely. And then final thing is again to draw the repeating unit. So I'd like you to have a go at that. Remember, if you're given the monomer, it's nice and easy. You're just drawing the monomer, but with the double bond broken. Okay, so we're just thinking about what we could pick up and repeat. That's the repeating unit. Or basically we're drawing the monomer, but instead of drawing the double bond, we're going to imagine that we've broken that bond up, and that then leaves space for 2 more molecules to connect. So that's our repeating unit there. Okay, so here's one final example, example 3. This time we're given the polymer structure. So here's part of the polymer structure. We've got this here, and we have to draw the monomer and draw the repeating unit. If I hadn't said already, I would hope you've been copying out the full question for these first 3 examples, but we'll then look at some practice questions and you don't need to write out the whole thing. But this should help for your notes. So we've got to draw the monomer based on the polymer structure. The easiest thing to do with that is, first of all, to be honest, try and identify the repeating unit. I know I've asked for that in part B, but we're going to try and identify that. So remember, that's the almost like, you can again think of it as an H shape. So we're looking for an H shape that repeats itself. So this carbon's got 2 hydrogens, this carbon's got a C6H6. They could have all kinds of weird things on here, strange symbols, not strange symbols, but formulas that you've never seen before. Don't worry, just think about what's attached. So this one's got 2 hydrogens, this one's got this, and then another hydrogen, then we're back to 2 hydrogens, and then this again. So hopefully you can see that the H shape that's repeating itself is this, this, this. So you can even draw a wee circle around that. That might help you. Or a strange wiggly line around it if you want. So we've got to draw the monomer. So remember, the monomer must have the carbon-carbon double bond, because it's the unsaturated monomers that combine to make the polymer structure. So when we write this out, really simple, we just draw it out exactly as it is here, but instead of having these bonds that are spread out that are linking up the chain, we're just going to draw it with a double bond instead. So I would probably start with the double bond, and then we're just going to draw all these substituents on. So we've got C6H6 up the top, and then hydrogens all around here. Nice and easy. And then we're also going to draw the repeating unit, and you just need to make sure that you're aware of the difference between the monomer and the repeating unit. So the monomer, like I say, must have the carbon-carbon double bond. The repeating unit is exactly the same as the monomer, except we show it with the bond opened up, as if it's part of the chain. So for the repeating unit, we're going to draw, instead of a double bond, we're going to draw that bond opened up, and we're going to do our C6H6. Again, notice how I'm taking care for this bond to go to the carbon and not to the hydrogens there. And that's us. So we'll look at some example questions next. Okay, so the last thing I want you to do is have a go at some questions relating to polymers. Make sure you pause the video now and try these questions before looking at the answers, which will appear in just a few seconds on the video. Okay, so here are the answers. Question 1, you've got the polymer structure based on the monomer cyanoethane. So that's polycyanoethane. Hopefully that one was fairly straightforward for you. Question 2, the diagram showed the polymer and you had to draw the repeating unit. So there it is on the slide. Again, you just have to look for the, I like to think of it as an H shape that repeats itself. And then you have to write the name of the monomer. Well, if the polymer is called polydichloroethene, monomer, nice and easy, just take the poly off the start of the name and it'll be just dichloroethene. So note that that repeating unit doesn't show the monomer. So this is not dichloroethene, it doesn't have a double bond, but if we were to draw the actual monomer, then it would have a double bond and it would fit the name dichloroethene. Okay. And then you had to draw the monomer, which was used to make the polymer on the previous slide. And again, you're looking for the H shape, but this time when you're drawing the monomer, you need to make sure that you have the double bond present. And if you look at this one, if we name it in the way we would normally name a hydrocarbon, if we start at one end and find the longest chain of carbons, we can either start here or at the other end. And what we find is we find the double bond. If we number this 1, 2, 3, 4, we give the double bond the lowest possible number. We would find this would be butene, this monomer here. Oops. Okay, so thanks for listening. I've tried to keep this week as short as I can. If you think you need more practice, then try the Scholar pages or search Miss Adams Polymers on YouTube for some more practice. Thanks for listening.